Welcome back to the world behind midnight. The stories they don't tell in daylight. My name is Weston Decker. I spent 11 years as a Navy SEAL, 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, 1 to Iraq, and somewhere around 400 hours of night operations in terrain that would make most people quit before breakfast. I've been shot at. I've watched good men die. I've held ground in complete darkness with nothing but a suppressed rifle and the sound of my own breathing to keep me company. None of that prepared me for Pisgah. I want to be clear about something before I get into this. I'm not here to sell you anything. I don't have a book deal. I don't run a podcast or a YouTube channel. A friend convinced me to record this, said people needed to hear it, and I figured if even one person decides not to take that trail, the one past graveyard fields toward the upper ridge above Looking Glass Rock, then it was worth opening my mouth. This happened 14 months ago. I remember every detail the way you remember things that change you permanently. I'd been out of the teams for about 2 years when Matthias Wallace called me. Matthias and I went back to Bud S. He was 2 classes ahead of me. One of those guys who made everything look effortless and somehow made you feel like you needed to work harder just by standing next to him. After he separated, he'd gotten involved with a small private outfit, low profile, the kind of work that doesn't appear on any LinkedIn profile. I'd been out of the teams for about 2 years when Matthias Wallace called me. Matthias and I went back to Bud S. He was 2 classes ahead of me. One of those guys who made everything look effortless and somehow made you feel like you needed to work harder just by standing next to him. After he separated, he'd gotten involved with a small private outfit, low profile, the kind of work that doesn't appear on any LinkedIn profile. He told me he had a contract in Western North Carolina, a wildlife investigation. His words, a series of disappearances in the Pisgah National Forest had drawn attention from parties he couldn't name on the phone. Hikers, mostly, 3 and 8 months, along the same corridor between graveyard fields and the backside of Looking Glass Rock. The official reports said exposure, disorientation, one ruled accidental fall. But the families weren't satisfied. And apparently, neither were some people higher up the chain. He needed 2 more bodies. People who could move quietly, think clearly, and not panic. He'd already brought in Luca England, former 75th Ranger, best tracker I'd ever worked with. The kind of man who could read ground the way other people read books. And Camilla Maureen, a wildlife biologist with a background in large predator behavior, who'd done consulting work for a federal agency she was equally vague about. I said yes. Honestly, I needed the work, and I missed the structure of a mission. I had no idea what I was walking into. We drove up into the Blue Ridge in late October. The trees were past peak color, most of the leaves already down. The forest floor thick and brown, the ridgeline skeletal against a gray sky. Matthias had arranged a staging point at a private property outside of Brevard, a farmhouse owned by a retired Forest Service ranger named Addison Rosa, a compact, quiet woman in her 60s who had been walking those mountains for 40 years. Addison met us at the door, looked us over the way people look at volunteers before a difficult surgery, and said, "I'll tell you what I know, but I want you to understand something first. The Cherokee have a name for what's been seen up there. They've had it for a long time. That matters." She made coffee and sat us down at her kitchen table. What she described, what she'd been piecing together from reports, from conversations with local hunters, from her own decades in those woods, was a pattern. Something had been in that corridor for years, maybe longer. It moved primarily at night, though there were daylight incidents. It was large, bipedal, but not consistently. Witnesses who'd seen it at distance described a gait that shifted, as though it couldn't decide what it was, and the physical evidence left behind was difficult to explain. Prints that were canine in structure, but human in proportion, claw marks on trees at 7 and 8 feet of height, and in one case, a deer carcass wedged 15 feet up in the crook of an oak in a manner that required either a large predator or something close to human-level intentionality. Camilla was taking notes. Luca was quiet, staring at the table. Matthias asked the obvious question. Addison didn't hesitate. The old stories call it grayback. The dogman, if you want the modern word. I've never seen it myself, but I've seen what it leaves behind, and I've seen what it does to people who get close to it. She looked at each of us in turn. I'm not telling you not to go. You'll go anyway. I'm telling you not to separate. Not for any reason, not even to cover ground. We went in the following morning. 4 of us, full kit, rifles, thermal optics, medical, cum gear, GPS. We weren't playing around. The plan was a 3-day sweep of the corridor, working from graveyard fields up to the ridge, establishing observation points, looking for physical evidence, and if we encountered the subject, documenting it and assessing threat level. The first day was clean. The forest was beautiful, in the way that old forests are, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses against your ears. We found a print in the soft soil near a creek crossing about 2 miles in. Luca crouched over it for a long time without speaking. It was roughly the size of a man's boot, longer than wide, but the toe structure was wrong. 5 impressions at the front, spread wider than a human foot, and a faint but distinct claw mark at each tip. That's not a bear, Camilla said. No, Luca agreed. We photographed it, measured it, and kept moving. That night we camped at the first observation point, a ridgeline that gave us clean sight lines in 3 directions. We ran 2-hour watch rotations. Nothing came. But sometime around 3 in the morning, during Luca's watch, something vocalized from the tree line below us. He woke us all immediately. Not because he was scared. Luca didn't scare easily, but because he said he didn't recognize the sound, and in 11 years of fieldwork across 4 continents, that had never happened to him before. We all heard the second one. It was low, deep in a way that seemed to come from the ground itself, rather than from a throat. It had a rhythm to it, not quite a howl, not quite a bark, something between the two but longer and more deliberate, like a sound designed to carry, like a sound designed to be understood. It came again, closer. We held position, thermals up, scanning the tree line. For 20 minutes, nothing moved that we could see. Then the sound stopped, and the silence that replaced it was different from the silence before, heavier, more intentional, the silence of something that had decided to stop announcing itself. Nobody slept after that. The second day took us up toward Looking Glass Rock, following the upper trail before cutting off into unmanaged terrain. The forest changed as we gained elevation. Denser, older, the canopy thicker, even with the leaves down. There were more signs here, more claw marks on the trees. A section of trail where something had dragged what appeared to be a large animal carcass. The drag marks were 18 inches wide, and the soil was torn up on both sides, as though by feet, not by something rolling or tumbling. Camilla estimated the drag weight at over 200 pounds based on the depth of the impressions. That's not a human being, Matthias said. No, she said. But whatever made it was walking upright. We pushed on. At approximately 1400 hours, Luca stopped us with a hand signal. He'd seen something. He pointed southeast, toward a dense stand of hemlocks, about 80 meters off the trail. We fanned out slowly, quietly, and glassed the area. I saw it first. It was standing at the edge of the hemlocks, standing upright, though not quite the way a person stands. The posture was slightly forward-leaning, shoulders broad and rounded, arms hanging lower than they should. It was large. I estimated 7 feet, possibly more. Dark fur or hair, matted and thick, covering most of what I could see. The head was the part that didn't make sense. It was wrong for a human, and wrong for anything else I'd encountered. The skull shape, the muzzle, the ears high on the head, angled forward. It was looking directly at us. For approximately 4 seconds, none of us moved. None of us spoke. The creature didn't move either. It simply stood there, regarding us with an intelligence that I cannot explain and cannot forget. This was not an animal that had blundered into our path. This was something that had been watching us, had decided to let us see it, and was now waiting to see what we would do. Then Camilla made a small sound, not loud, just a sharp intake of breath, and it moved. I've seen fast. I've worked with operators who could clear a room in under 2 seconds. I've watched big cats move on training footage. What I saw move through those hemlocks was faster than any of it. Not a sprint, more like an unfolding, a sudden reorganization of mass from stillness into motion, and then it was gone. Just gone. The hemlocks swayed once, and the forest was empty. We stood there for a long moment. Did everyone see that? Matthias asked. We had all seen it. We spent the next 4 hours trying to locate it again. Luca tracked the disturbance in the undergrowth for about a quarter mile before the trail went cold on rocky ground. We found 2 more prints. We found a section of bark stripped from a pine at approximately 8 feet of height. Recent, the wood still pale beneath the torn surface. We found nothing else. That night was the one that ended the operation. We were camped below the ridgeline, in a small depression that gave us good cover. Watch rotation as before. I had the 01, 002, 03, 00 shift. At approximately 0210, I heard something moving in the dark to the north of camp. Heavy, rhythmic, not trying to be quiet. I woke Matthias with a touch and pointed north. He came up with his thermal. There was a heat signature at the edge of my optics range, maybe 60 meters out. In the trees. Large, it was moving parallel to our camp, not toward it. Walking on 2 legs. The gait unmistakable, even at distance, through the thermal image. It covered the span of my view in under 30 seconds, and disappeared into the dark. Matthias and I looked at each other. It's pacing us, he said quietly. In the morning, we found the tracks. They formed a wide arc around our camp. A complete circuit, the impressions deep and deliberate in the frost-softened ground. Something had walked a slow circle around us in the dark while we slept, staying just outside the range we'd likely notice. Not hunting, not fleeing, watching. Matthias made the call to extract. Not out of fear, exactly. I want to be precise about this, but because we had reached the limit of what we could do with the resources and the mandate we had visual confirmation, we had physical evidence, we had documentation, and we had a clear indication that the subject was aware of us, had been aware of us, and was behaving in a manner that suggested a level of intelligence incompatible with any known wildlife species in that region. Continuing without a clearer objective and without additional support would not have been tactical. It would have been reckless. We got out. The report went up through Matthias's contact chain. I don't know what happened to it after that. I've heard nothing official. The trail past Graveyard Fields is still open. People still hike it. I think about that sometimes. I think about what it meant that it walked that circle around us. I've run the possible interpretations over and over in my mind, the way you run a problem set methodically, eliminating options. It wasn't marking territory. It had 100 opportunities to do that more directly. It wasn't building up to an attack. We were stationary and exposed, and it had the dark. The most honest interpretation I've been able to arrive at, the one I keep coming back to, despite how much I don't like it, is the simplest one. It was curious about us. It was curious about us. It watched us the way we watch things we're trying to understand. And that, more than the size, more than the speed, more than the sound it made in the dark, is what I can't let go of. Because if it's curious about us, it's been curious about others. And some of those others didn't come back. Luca England hasn't talked about what we saw. Not to me, not to anyone, as far as I know. Camilla filed her portion of the report and, last I heard, was back in the field somewhere else. Addison Rosa called me about a month after we returned. She didn't ask what we found. She just said, "You came back. That's something." She said it like she meant it. I don't go back to Pisgah. Matthias asked, 6 months after the operation, if I'd be willing to return with a larger team, more equipment, a longer timeline. I told him I'd think about it. I'm still thinking, but I want to be honest with you. Part of me, the part that spent 11 years running toward things that scared other people, part of me wants to go back, wants to understand what I saw, wants to know what it knows. And that part of me is exactly why I probably shouldn't. If you're planning to hike Graveyard Fields, the trail to Looking Glass Rock, I'm not going to tell you that you can't. I'm not going to tell you it's definitely still out there. But I will tell you this, pay attention to the silence. Not the ordinary silence of woods and wind. The other kind. The kind that has weight. The kind that means something in the dark has stopped making noise on purpose. When you hear that kind, and you'll know it when you do, don't separate from your group. Don't look for what made it. And whatever you do, don't make the mistake of thinking that because nothing has happened yet, nothing is going to. It was there before you arrived, and it will be there long after you leave. End of testimony, Weston Decker. Weston Decker still hasn't gone back to Pisgah. Whether he ever does, we don't know. But what his team documented in those mountains doesn't disappear just because the operation ended. The trail is still open. The forest is still there. And whatever circled their camp that night, it's still there too. If this story stayed with you, you're already one of us. This is what the world behind midnight is built for. The encounters that don't fit neatly into any official report. The things seen at the edges of the world we think we understand. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave a comment telling me where you were when you first heard something you couldn't explain, in the woods, in the dark, anywhere. I read every single one. I'll see you at midnight.